Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's kick things off with a look at the day's headlines. South Korea's top diplomat highlights Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women at the UN Human Rights Council. The influence peddling trial that's been rumbling on for 9 months is finally coming to an end. Prosecutors are set to demand punishment for the ousted former president Park Geun-hye. Plus, with Syria ripped apart by wave after wave of artillery strikes, Russia's Vladimir Putin orders a daily 5-hour pause in the Syrian government's assault on rebel-held positions near Damascus. Our top story this morning, South Korea's top diplomat has raised the unresolved issue of Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. This in a speech to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Park Geun-hye also touched upon other human rights issues during her address. Eastern Ghouta starts us off.
Marking the 70th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, South Korean Foreign Minister Park Geun-hye delivered her keynote speech on Monday to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland. Among the issues she raised was the unresolved issue of Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. While she did not name Japan directly, Kang called for a victim-centered approach to the issue, adding that the victims, now women in their 80s and 90s, were still striving to restore their dignity and honor. Japan formally complained about the keynote speech, warning that it should not be allowed to harm bilateral relations at a critical time in East Asia. Junichi Ehara, Japan's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, added that Kang's statement was totally unacceptable. Highlighting the message of peace and prosperity the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics has sent out to the world, Kang also called on the North Korean regime to improve the human rights of its people, adding that the isolated state must heed the call of the international community and abandon its nuclear and missile programs.
It is imperative to ensure that the spirit of Pyeongchang lives long after the Games, so that peace can take firm root on the Korean Peninsula and the dire human rights situation in the north can be improved.
Kang also threw her support behind the so-called MeToo movement in South Korea and the world, pledging the South Korean government's commitment to improve gender equality, protecting women's rights, and abolishing wartime violence against women. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, representatives from South and North Korea have just met to discuss the North's participation at the Pyeongchang Paralympics. That's happening next month, and this comes on the heels of the Olympics, where the North's participation was generally considered a success. We have on the line Kwon Jang-ho, our correspondent at the Unification Ministry in Seoul. So, Jang-ho, what can we expect from the talks today?
Good morning, Mark. So the representatives from the two Koreas should have met by now at the border village of Panmunjom in a demilitarized zone. The topic of discussion is arranging the details of the North's participation at the Pyeongchang Paralympics that will start on March 9th. The South's 3-member delegation is led by Lee Joo-tae, the Director General of Inter-Korean Exchanges, alongside another Unification Ministry official and the Paralympics Chief of the Pyeongchang Organizing Committee. The North delegation includes Hwang Chung-sung, an official from Pyongyang State Agency of Inter-Korean Affairs, who will be accompanied by 2 representatives from North Korean organizations for disabled people. Details to be discussed include the exact number of athletes, what events they will take part in, as well as their travel arrangements, accommodation, and other logistical issues. This carries on from talks last month, where the two Koreas made an initial agreement that Pyongyang would send a 150-member delegation that also includes an art troupe and cheering squad. It's similar to the arrangements that were made for the Olympics, but on a smaller scale, as that delegation consisted of almost 500 members. So today's talks are expected to go smoothly. The South Korean chief, Lee Joo-tae, said before he left for Panmunjom this morning that he would do everything he can to continue the mood towards improving inter-Korean relations. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much for that report, Jang-ho, and do keep us updated if we have any developments there. Now, we are going to stay with inter-Korean affairs. South Korea's South Korea continues to make efforts to keep the dialogue momentum alive even after the end of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Officials from the presidential office of Cheongwa-dae held meetings on Monday with the visiting North Korean delegation for a second straight day. Our chief Cheongwa-dae correspondent Moon Jae-in with more.
The historic moment of unity that brought the two Koreas together for the first time in years is now over. The last 2 weeks of outreach have been sweet and friendly, but what happens from here on forth is what actually matters. The bare politics of things. How do we make sure the Olympics-driven detente last? The choices lay bare South Korean President Moon Jae-in's predicament, evidently on his mind, as he greeted Chinese President Xi Jinping's special envoy to the Olympics closing ceremony, Vice Premier Liu Yan-dong at the Blue House on Monday.
이번 동계올림픽을 계기로 이루어진 남북 대화 이 분위기를 올림픽 이후까지 지속해 나가는 것이 대단히 중요하다고 생각합니다. 우리 한반도의 비핵화와 또 평화 구축을 위한 남북 간의 대화, 그리고 또 그것을 위한 북미 간의 대화에 대해서 중국 쪽에서도 적극적으로 지지하고 협력해 주시기를 부탁드립니다.
South Korean media had been abuzz with suggestions that some kind of talks between North Korea and the U.S. could take place while the respective delegations, U.S. led by its presidential advisor and first daughter Ivanka Trump, and the North by a former spy chief Kim Young-chul were in town. The Ivanka-led delegation left South Korea Monday, and there has not been any word of interaction between the Americans and the North Koreans. The Blue House did announce, however, that President Moon's chief security advisor and other key officials had lunch with the North Korean delegation, releasing a brief statement that reads, "The two sides agreed to work together for permanent peace in the Korean Peninsula, sustainable relations between North and South Korea, and balanced cooperation with the international society." Little is known at this point whether there has been any progress in the South Korean president's efforts to bring North Korea and the U.S. to the dialogue table, whether there had been any interaction between the two, even if low-key and working level, and whether North Korea has attached preconditions for starting talks with the U.S.
Now, what we do know is that something is in the works behind closed doors between the two Koreas, with the South Korean president ever mindful that he must make headway before the Winter Paralympic Games come to an end on March 18th. Now, that's when Seoul and Washington have said their mass joint military drills, which North Korea may have laid out as a precondition for talks with the U.S., will begin shortly thereafter. Moon Jae-in, Arirang News, the Blue House.
Now, as was touched upon in that report, North Korea's Kim Young-chul was known to have told President Moon Jae-in that Pyongyang is willing to talk with Washington. What's most surprising is that the comment came despite the president's direct mention of the regime's denuclearization. Oh Jung-hee reports.
We now know that North Korea repeatedly said it's willing to talk with the United States, even though South Korea spoke directly of denuclearization. The leader of North Korea's high-level delegation, Kim Yong-chul, met with South Korean President Moon Jae-in on Sunday, shortly before the closing ceremony of the Olympics. Kim said Pyongyang is willing to talk with Washington, but the initial response from the White House was simply, "We'll see," and that talks would depend on a commitment to denuclearize. On Monday, it turned out that President Moon in his meeting with the North Korean general actually brought up the need for denuclearization. President Moon is reported to have said that if North Korea halts its nuclear and missile provocations and returns to the path of dialogue, then the international community will cooperate on related measures. It's reported that the North Korean delegates listened to President Moon but showed no particular reaction. Sunday's meeting was the first time North Korea has openly and clearly mentioned its willingness to sit down with the U.S. Before and during the Olympics, Pyongyang was reluctant to speak with U.S. delegates, saying it wouldn't use the Olympics as a political opportunity. And just last week, the North's state-run news agency reported that the target of the regime's nuclear arms is the United States. But whether the North is really ready to discuss denuclearization with the U.S. in earnest is still up for debate.
Kim Young-chul apparently did not mention the word denuclearization of nuclear weapons yet. So we don't know whether North Korea's willingness to talk with the United States is about nuclear weapons of North Korea, or as it has pushed before, that any talks is possible if nuclear weapon is not the agenda of the talks with the United States.
South Korea has been keen to keep up the dialogue momentum with North Korea and eventually have that lead to talks between Washington and Pyongyang. But whether the North is actually willing to meet Washington's condition and discuss this nuclear program remains to be seen. 오정희, Arirang News.
A local court is hearing from prosecutors today on how long they think ousted former President Park Geun-hye should spend behind bars. The Seoul Central District Court is holding its final hearing as we speak. Prosecutors are likely to demand heavy punishment for Park, who was indicted last April on 18 charges that include bribery, abuse of power and leaking state secrets. The judge will hand down the former president's sentence in late March or early April. But let's get a brief rundown of the story so far from our Park So-yeon.
It all began in October 2016 with a tablet PC discovered by local TV news channel JTBC. The device, containing over 200 presidential documents, was a smoking gun that sparked one of the biggest, if not the biggest, scandal in Korea's modern history. The tablet, later found to be owned by Choi Soon-sil, a longtime friend of former President Park Geun-hye, proved alleged outside interference in state affairs. And on October 25th, the day after the news report, then President Park Geun-hye made a public apology. The investigation kicks in fast, and just days later, state prosecutors arrest a close friend of the former president on charges of meddling state affairs while holding no government post. The investigative team, led by Special Prosecutor Park Geun-hye, launches with approval of the government. At the National Assembly, lawmakers vote to impeach the president, taking up calls by hundreds of thousands of Koreans who would gather for candlelight vigils every Saturday evening in central Seoul. And on March 15, 2017, Special Prosecutors said Park, who had her impeachment conferred by the Constitutional Court, would be summoned for questioning on the influence peddling scandal. The Justice Office approved Park's pretrial detention shortly before dawn of March 31st, and she began her time behind bars. And on May 23rd, the trial of South Korea's first female president begins. Her charges, 18 of them, including bribery, abuse of power, and leaking state secrets. It wasn't an easy road with unexpected hiccups along the way. The jailed former president had refused to attend hearings on multiple occasions, citing poor health, and her defense team quit en masse when Park condemned the trial as political revenge. And today, the trial comes to a close after 9 long months, and the eyes of a nation will be watching to see what kind of punishment prosecutors demand. Park So-yeon, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has joined the growing numbers of supporters of the MeToo movement, pledging to use all available means to stamp out sexual harassment in Korea. In a meeting with his top aides on Monday, the president expressed respect to the victims who spoke up against powerful figures involved in the cases and urged thorough investigations.
문화와 의식이 바뀌어야 하는 문제인 만큼 범사회적인 미투 운동의 확산과 각 분야별 자정 운동이 필요하다고 생각합니다.
South Korea has seen the MeToo movement spread from the cultural to academic sector in recent weeks, with many women coming forward accusing high-profile men in art, entertainment, literature and religion of sexual misconduct. Now, this just coming in, the Bank of Korea has kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 1.5%. This follows a freeze in January. In November, the central bank raised its key interest rate by a 0.25 percentage point, marking the first rate hike in over 6 years. We'll have more details on this rate freeze during our next newscast at noon Korea time. US President Donald Trump is reportedly pushing to impose tariffs on steel imports in a bid to revive America's flagging steel industry. At a recent meeting at the White House, Trump said he's willing to slap substantial tariffs on steel imports, even if it costs a little more, saying more jobs would be created in the process. He's reportedly pushing for a 25% tariff on all steel imports, a move that could spark a trade war with other countries. The US Commerce Department has recommended President Trump to curb steel and aluminium imports from South Korea, China and other nations. President Trump has not made a final decision, but he must make up his mind on steel and aluminium imports by April 11th and April 19th, respectively. Now, when we think of the fourth industrial revolution, we tend to underestimate its potential and just think within the boundaries of how it could impact our lives. But according to farmers, there's more use to it, as the implementation of big data in some farms has provided amazing results in terms of yields and also efficiency. Jo Sung-min reports.
This greenhouse covers some 7,000 square meters of land, but 2 farmers can take care of the whole place. This farm has far fewer employees than other farms of similar size, but the owner says he still gets a yield 10 to 20% bigger than other farms.
My income has increased even though the work takes less time. That gives me more free time for myself, so I can't complain.
The owner says it's big data that has made his life easier. He installed a machine that analyzes all sorts of variables, including temperature, humidity levels, air circulation, and growth status. All of the information goes to his phone, which he can use to adjust the conditions at will. In fact, he's one of the few early adopters integrating big data into his business. It's a technology the nation's Rural Development Administration says will likely become a trend in local agricultural industry in the near future. The agency says the use of big data at vegetable farms can double yields for less than half the current labor hours and cost.
We are developing a fantastic big data model that can be used to achieve the best yields for a range of produce, including bell peppers and strawberries.
Elsewhere, big data is being used in livestock industry. Researchers are using big data systems to collect genetic information from cows and make customized feeds to boost the animal's growth and quality. Jo Sung-min, Arirang News.
Now let's take a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we're going to start in conflict-ridden Syria. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has ordered what he's calling a humanitarian pause in Syria's Eastern Ghouta. The rebel-held area has come under intense bombardment by pro-government forces loyal to President Assad for more than 1 week now. For more on this and other international stories, let's turn to our Noah Adam. So Adam, what exactly does this move by Moscow mean, and does it finally mean we might see an end to this bloodshed?
Well, Mark, President Putin has called for the shelling to stop for just 5 hours every day, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. starting Tuesday, to allow civilians to leave and for humanitarian aid to come in. Time will tell if there will be a complete stop in hostilities, with nations, including the US, calling for an immediate end. But for now, it's only temporary. The Russian military has also said that the Syrian government has arranged what it called a humanitarian corridor to allow, in theory, a safe exit for residents. But the move is not the 30-day ceasefire resolution passed by the UN Security Council on Saturday. Russia, a key Syrian ally, did vote for it, but only after it was weakened by provisions including the exclusion of operations against Islamic State and Al-Qaeda-linked militants. Airstrikes and artillery fire from pro-Syrian forces continue despite the passage of the resolution, and a few dozen civilians are reported to have been killed in the past couple of days. There have also been reports of a suspected chlorine attack in Eastern Ghouta on Sunday, with the White House again pointing the finger at the Syrian government. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov rejected such reports as a hoax. Syria has been accused of using chemical weapons on civilians in the past, allegations the Assad regime denies. Saudi Arabia is continuing its recent efforts to give more freedom to women by now allowing them to join the military. Saudi women have until Thursday to apply for positions with the rank of soldier in the provinces of Riyadh, Mecca, Al-Qasim and Medina. Their roles, however, will reportedly be restricted to more of a security position rather than frontline combat. They must fulfill 12 conditions, including certain age, weight and height requirements, and must not have any previous government employment history. The move is the latest in Crown Prince Salman's social and economic reform drive dubbed Vision 2030. A second powerful earthquake has hit Papua New Guinea in as many days amid an increase in seismic activity along the fringes of the Pacific known as the Ring of Fire. Tuesday's 6.4 magnitude tremor struck 142 kilometers southwest of the city of Mount Hagen at a depth of about 10 kilometers. This led to a number of oil and gas operations to be closed due to damaged facilities, including that of energy giant ExxonMobil. Meanwhile, a 6.1 magnitude quake jolted waters just off eastern Indonesia. It struck at a depth of about 12 kilometers in an area 44 kilometers off the coast of Ayabuaya. No tsunami warning was issued. A new study shows that 7 out of 10 millennials in Britain are expected to be overweight or obese by their late 30s or early 40s. The group covers those born between the early 1980s and mid-90s, and Cancer Research UK says they are on track to be the fattest generation since records began. The study also shows that just half of their parents, the so-called baby boomers born just after World War II, were overweight or obese at that age. Cancer Research UK warned that being overweight is the UK's biggest cause of cancer after smoking, and that millennials needed to maintain a balanced diet.
Good morning. Seoul is not going to be as mild today, but we can still look forward to some warmth with big gaps in temperatures across much of the country. Meanwhile, Daejeon and Daegu will see highs jumping over 15 degrees Celsius. And for a closer look, Seoul will get up to 8 degrees Celsius, while Busan will make it to 15 degrees this afternoon. Few clouds will move in later in the afternoon. And some welcome rain is in the forecast nationwide on Wednesday, but that rain will also bring a brief drop in temperatures on Independence Movement Day, which is on March 1st. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. While many regions in the southern provinces will have late March-like temperatures this afternoon, most parts in North Korea will continue to have colder conditions along with snow in some parts. And as for the rest of Asia, Tokyo will have relatively cooler temperatures at a high of 10 degrees Celsius and expect to see a few clouds later in the day. Meanwhile, Melbourne will reach a sunny top of 32 degrees Celsius in the afternoon, and you'll need to wait until Thursday to see the heat easing up. Heading to North America, the dry winter weather pattern and above normal temperatures in Los Angeles will ease along with showers on Tuesday. And as for South America, those in Bogota should enjoy some sunshine on Tuesday before rain returns on the city on Wednesday. And taking you to Europe, dozens of flights have already been cancelled for Tuesday in Britain as airlines prepare for worsening winter weather, so check your schedules beforehand. Lastly, to Africa, Tripoli and Algiers will be rainy, while Addis Ababa will have scattered thunderstorms. And that's all the weather update for now.
Well, thank you as always to our Ji-hyun for the weather update there. And that's pretty much where we're going to leave it for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. If you want to catch up on more of the latest, don't forget that you can go to our website, arirang.com/news, and find all the stories there. Our next scheduled bulletin is coming up at noon Korea time in around an hour and a half from now. So until then, goodbye.
in search of timeless and priceless heritage.